Our guest on This is America and the World is Bill Kristol, a well-known political commentator and advisor. He's the co-founder and an editor-at-large of the political opinion and analysis website, The Bulwark. Previously, he was co-founder and editor of the Weekly Standard and served as a senior staff member in both the Reagan and Bush presidential administrations. We began this conversation on last week's program, and this week we're picking up where we left off as Bill answers a question I asked about the 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump in 2020.
I very much hold the conservative elites responsible for this. I think you've had many instances in American history, God knows in world history, populist movements, distasteful, capitalizing on grievances, promoting conspiracy theories, very free and easy with the truth. They get millions, tens of millions of followers. They usually kind of top out, though. You know, there's a limit on how much they can do, how much they can run things. So there's usually an establishment that says at some point, no. Joe McCarthy, very powerful for 3-4 years. And then finally, Eisenhower and others basically say, no, we just can't go on. And they have an excuse to go ahead. McCarthy gives them an excuse, as it were, and a weapon, and they stop him. Same, I'd say, with a lot of other instances in American history. Here, we've had a conservative elites who've just never been willing to take any risk of opposing, saying this is too much. Whereas in January 6th, they said this is too much on January 7th. And a month later, they were justifying, well, we don't really need to convict him. He's out of office. And 6 months later, they were saying, well, we don't want to really get into any internal fights with other Republicans. So we don't really need to take this big lie stuff on forthrightly. And, if Trump's the nominee, I kind of hope he isn't. But if he's the nominee in 2024, he's probably better than the alternative. How few people have followed Liz Cheney and saying, no, this is unacceptable. And for me, that's the biggest story, isn't it, really? I mean, that Liz Cheney is alone. Who would have predicted that? If you had told me there'd be only 40 people in the House with Liz Cheney, I would have said, okay, that's unfortunate. I wish there were 140, but I can sort of see that after the last few years. But that she's alone, that says a lot about where we are.
2022, 2024, is the question going to be Trump or democracy?
I mean, I think it will be to some degree, and a lot depends on that, whether Trump runs and if he's the nominee and so forth. It also is going to be, because it always is, about the incumbent administration and the people in power, which is a Democratic president, Joe Biden, and a Democratic Congress right now, which is why those of us who've been so concerned about Trump also have been pretty concerned that, or hopeful, that the Biden administration would be successful. And less because, partly because it's good for the country to have a successful administration, and partly because at this time in particular, one wants to get those wavering people who thought, well, gee, the Democrats are just, were persuaded by some of the rhetoric about the Democrats, and let them see, you know what, stock market's pretty high, unemployment's pretty low. Made some mistakes on the virus probably in terms of testing and the boosters, but not rolling them out fast enough and so forth, or not promoting them enough, but mixed messaging. But basically, hopefully we're over that, and mostly in 2-3 months, people look up and say, okay, I may not love the Democrats. I might vote for a Republican here for mayor or something. But, it's not the end of the world to have the Democrats governing, especially when you have a Trumpy Republican Party. The Democrats need to do more to reach out to those voters. And the main way to reach out to them is just to govern successfully. And I think Biden's done some good things, but I'm a little worried that you don't see the kind of don't entirely see an administration that's on a path to sort of a big success.
They're not really very good at messaging, are they?
The Democrats, I've got to say, now that I've worked with them for the last couple of years, not having done much of that for the preceding 30 years, yeah, they are. You really
they're
do.
They're lousy at it.
Could you guys just say, we have literally 3.9% unemployment that was announced this past week, which I think is the normal. In our day, zero unemployment in effect was 4.0% because there's always some churn between jobs, right? So, there's basically no unemployment to speak of in the country. The stock market, that's if you're a worker. Your wages are going up. The stock market, if you're an investor, is as high as it's ever been. Now, there are some problems with inflation, supply chain. No one should deny any of those. But at the end of the day, the fact that the Biden administration can't sort of sell that as, they said we were socialists who were going to destroy the economy. Look around you. Is the economy destroyed? I don't think so.
Are I want to talk about the president's speech on January 6th. Take a little break before we get to that, because I think there was some messaging going on there that may be a precursor of things to come. Tell the folks at home we're talking with Bill Kristol. He is the editor, one of the editors at large at the Bulwark, and a veteran of the Reagan and Bush administrations, and is a regular political commentator, especially on all of the cable news programs and news programs, especially MSNBC. So take a little break. Back on the other side. This is America and the World. Underwriting for This is America and the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, the National Association for Children of Addiction, Faces and Voices of Recovery, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotendaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, Uniting People Through Musical Diplomacy. Bill, on the 6th of January, not too long ago, the president gave a very strong speech and really called out President Trump without naming him. And I think that some people seem to have seen that as a turning point. How was your reaction to that speech, and what do you think it holds for the future?
I very much liked the speech. I understand why the president didn't want to get into this kind of back and forth, as his aides might have put it before, and wanted to try to, let's just go back to normalcy and let's hope the Republican Party comes to its senses. I think that became sort of untenable in the run up to January 6th, the denials about what happened on January 6th, the refusal to support the efforts of the January 6th committee, except for very, very few Republicans. And so I think the president decided he's got to speak up more forthrightly, and he's always been forthright, but more sternly, you might say, about what's at stake. And I think that might help. You know, the conventional wisdom among politicos and here in Washington is, oh, people vote on kitchen table issues. It'll be the economy, it'll be inflation, it'll be how they feel about COVID. It's not that no one votes on like preserving democracy. I'm not so sure that's true. I don't think that was true in 2020 when people turned against Trump. Maybe in an off-year election, it's a little harder to get people to see what's at stake. They don't think if they vote for some individual member of Congress, it's going to affect democracy one way or the other. But people might see, especially in some key states, that we can't just take free and fair elections and the votes being counted and respected for granted anymore. I think the combination of the Biden speech and the January 6th committee, the House committee, with Chairman Thompson and Liz Cheney and the others, has some potential to really bring home to people what's at stake. I think that committee, but I mean, people like me followed the Mueller investigation very closely, have very high regard for Bob Mueller. I think he produced a very serious report, and it all had very little effect, obviously. And then there was the Ukraine impeachment, and it was just really appalling, if you've been in government as I have, to see what he was doing and going around our State Department and delegating random individuals to sort of conduct foreign policy in very dishonest ways, in ways that entirely intended to benefit him personally. He got impeached, didn't get convicted, and that kind of ended. And so people have sort of decided that, well, none of this stuff matters. Maybe those things didn't matter. I'm not so sure that a real report that goes into detail of what Trump did from November 3rd to January 6th, and then on the day of January 6th, the extent to which there was a real plan to undercut our peaceful transfer of power here in the United States of America, I think that could have some effect. And that, combined with Biden's forthrightness, I think people might be underestimating how much of an issue that could be over the rest of this year.
What do you think is going to happen when they have these committee hearings, the January 6th committee hearings at night?
Apparently, they're thinking of having them, some of them in the evening, and I think they're going to have very senior people. Maybe there'll be people have never heard of who worked in the White House as deputy assistant to this or that, just saying what Trump was doing that afternoon. But I imagine we'll have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, saying also, what context did he have with Trump about this and about the Insurrection Act? And why did, incidentally, 10 former secretaries of defense sign a letter 3 days before January 6th warning that the military could not be used in inappropriate ways? I remember I was on the fringes of some of the discussions about that. And I mean, that was an extraordinary thing. If you haven't been in government, you may not realize how unprecedented that is and how reluctant a lot of these people are to get involved in what seems to be partisan politics. And then for them all to get together, from Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld on the right to President Obama's, President Clinton's secretaries of defense on the center and the left, to say, no, we have a series to back up. Incidentally, this is something that General Milley said, I think. He's the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he wanted that kind of backup reinforcement against the politicization of the military. He couldn't trust, unfortunately, I think his Secretary of Defense fully at the time, is that Trump had replaced, again, in a totally unprecedented way, his actual Secretary of Defense 4 days after the election. I remember when that happened, when Mark Esper got booted, I think it was November 7th. And Esper, one could argue about how great he was in standing up to Trump and so forth. Still, he was doing his job professionally. And I thought, what is going on? We're right after the election. We're 2 months from inauguration. I mean, people don't fire cabinet secretaries, 2 months before, unless they want to use that department for something sort of nefarious. Now, it didn't quite pan out. The military has very deeply established rules and norms. There were other civilians in the Defense Department who stood up to Trump, including even his own appointee, ultimately, I think. But the stuff that was going on, or that Trump tried to do at defense and at justice, the stuff he tried to do at the state level in Georgia and other places with phone calls and pressuring state election officials. I mean, I think bringing all that home to people could be, I think that's what they're going to try to do. So I think those hearings could be pretty dramatic.
In front of the Congress right now, especially the Senate, 2 bills that have to do with voting rights. And you just put your finger on the peaceful transfer of power, and also, the free and fair election that folks have a right to go out and vote in a free and fair election. There's 2 bills sitting before Congress. I think one of them is talking about mail-in ballots and making Election Day a national holiday. One of them has to do with if anybody's trying to change laws around, they have to kind of run it through the Justice Department. But it seems to me that these 2 bills, each has too much going on in them. If there were a simple bill that could be put in a sentence or 2, what would it be?
I mean, I'm so glad, honestly, Dennis, that you just said this, because I've been fighting or arguing with a lot of my friends, my Democratic friends, to do precisely what you're saying, not a sentence or 2, but to take the key core aspects of these bills out, put them together, add in, I would say, reform of the Electoral Count Act, which is what would fix the kind of uncertainties we have about how the electors get certified at the state level, and then what happens on January 6th with the House and the vice president, and does he have discretion? And a lot of that is really should be bipartisan. That part, at least, should be easier to do. But no, I totally agree. So the Democrats, and I respect them, they believe that the election day should be a national holiday. There are arguments for it. It is in many other countries.
Could a senator put up a bill that basically says Election Day is a national holiday? Could that be done?
Yeah, it could be. But the way they've got it all set up now, kind of in the House, they passed it all, and then in the Senate is this huge conglomeration of things.
Yeah, but where I'm going here is to take simple
Yes, well, I totally agree. And I was going to say it the opposite way, which is, look, we could live if Election Day is not a national holiday.
Yeah, okay.
We have, right? So let's though take the chunk of the Freedom to Vote Act.
Yeah, let's take 3 things. Take 3 things.
Don't let states replace impartial election administrators with partisan election administrators. Don't let state legislatures overturn what the voters have decided.
Okay,
let the Justice Department take a look where there's clear possible evidence of racial motives in redistricting and so forth.
So what would number two? What? So you've got that in there. What's number 2?
So I say, no election subversion for me is number 1, and in other words, not making sure the votes once cast are counted properly and respected, in the sense that the Congress and the state legislature of the Congress go ahead and appoint the right electors. And for me, number two would then be minimum standards of access to the ballot. You can't have a system where it's impossible for people in big cities and inner cities. It's incredibly difficult to vote. They ratchet back the voting days. They cut out voting on Sunday. But those can be pretty minimal. You don't have to resolve at the federal level whether there's 3 weeks or 2 weeks of mail-in ballots. And you don't have to resolve the national holiday issue and a lot of other things. But they've been very resistant, the Democrats, to doing what you just suggested. And the reason is they believe in these things. They're invested in them. They don't think it will help.
Okay, what's number three? So you want no subversion in the counting? You want to make
the
it
key
easy?
The key is no subversion at both the federal level and the state levels.
Okay.
Which is a little complicated, but doable. I would say number two for me is like basic minimum standards of voter access. Some of what we did in 2020, which were great. One point that hasn't been made.
What's number three? What's number
three? I would say is no racial bias in gerrymandering.
Okay, that's the bill. That's the bill. One paragraph. My question: can a senator introduce that paragraph as a bill?
Yeah, I mean, probably a little more than a paragraph, but sure, senators can introduce whatever they want. But one of the ways in which our system is broken is that we've gotten the parties have become the party leadership so strong that there's a lot of pressure on them. Well, we don't want to signal that we only care about this part, not that part. We have to keep it all together. We saw this, of course, on the infrastructure bill too, right? Because in a way, it's crazy, right? And I think it's politically foolish for the Democrats. That is to say, if you take the infrastructure model, which is a little easier to see, I mean, much better, I think, to force the Republicans to cast tough votes. You're against the child tax credit. You're against helping people with Medicare, as opposed to Republicans being able to say, who knows what's in this massive thing? It's $1.2 trillion. They don't know what's in it. Most of it wouldn't work. We're against it. That's not even a crazy argument, honestly. Whereas here's a precise targeted benefit that, which is for poor parents or middle-class parents. But again, the Democrats weirdly have, I think, in this respect, they've been unimaginative in the way you're suggesting, in terms of packaging these things.
But this Build Back Better is really child care, elder care, health care.
Right.
That's it. Put it in a paragraph, get it debated, and let's see what happens.
I totally agree. Now, look, it would be good to change the Senate rules, and it's crazy to have a filibuster before you can even debate. It's one thing to say you need 60 votes to pass something. The way the rules now are, but it wasn't this way until about 30 years ago in practice, is you need 60 votes to even debate something. That the Democrats should change right away, in my opinion.
Can they change it?
Yeah, that they could. They could get 50 votes and just say, I'm sorry, we're going to not have filibusters on what's called motions to proceed anymore. That way, at least there'd be a public debate.
A filibuster is a kind of a technical term to delay or block some legislation or debate.
And now it's used to block even debating on legislation, which was not really what was intended.
Let's get people debating on the record and get people voting against healthy voting.
Right. Or offering amendments and let them say, okay, you don't like this version of the Medicare proposal? Why don't you propose your own? And then I think it gets harder for people to be just obstructionists. We've got a system now that unfortunately makes it politically quite easy for the other party to just obstruct. I mean, think about it from a common sense point of view. You've been in a million. We've all been in various organizations that have votes on things and debate things, and homeowner association or civic associations or whatever, right? And it's as if the way the Senate now works is we don't debate something and then say, well, you need a supermajority to pass it. Okay, that's maybe a case for that. It's that you can't debate something until 60 votes are there to debate. So it's ridiculous. I mean, you don't even see what the merit of these ideas are, which is why the whole debate on both voting rights and infrastructure and building back better has been so weird in a way if you've been around Washington for a while. It's so unsubstantive. I mean, no one's actually discussing, well, what would this really be? This idea is a good idea. Maybe that one isn't, we can put off. It's all just a general, either the Democrats, we need to do this. It's, we need to help people. Republicans, they're just throwing your money out the window. And that's really the level of discourse. And that's not healthy for the country.
Joe Manchin, good, bad, or so-so?
I don't really know him. He's a senator from for a senator from West Virginia. You're not going to get a much more progressive senator from West Virginia, I think. So Democrats need to learn to work with him. They should be happy he's a Democrat.
Can Biden bring Manchin in and say, okay, these are 6 items in the bill. Which ones are you okay with? And Manchin says, check, 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 check. 2, I don't like. 4, I'm okay with. And just run with it.
You would think so. The Biden people would say they've tried that, and Manchin's been frustratingly hard to pin down. But look, on voting, it's a little different. Their Manchin, the original bill, which was called H.R. 1, which passed the House, very big bill, full of wish list of progressive ideas. Some of them good, some of them not so good. Manchin said, no, I can't be for that. They did whittle that down. And the bill that's now passed the Senate is Manchin is a co-sponsor of. And so there's been a little bit of what you're describing, but much too little, I think. They need to be more imaginative. And one has the impression, watching the Democratic leadership, and I respect these people, and it's a tough job, believe me. There's a little bit of like, well, this is our plan, and we're just sticking to it. It's like a military army or something, we attacked here, it didn't quite work. We're going to attack here again, and eventually we're going to break through. Sometimes that works, sometimes that's the right strategy, but maybe sometimes you should think about a flanking maneuver or attacking in 3 different places at once, or, seducing over some people, some deserters from the other side. And I just get the sense there's a little bit of a lack of imagination in both the Biden administration and the Democratic leadership in Congress as just how to get these things done.
Going back to the opening of our previous program and the start of our conversation, when you look at America, good, bad, and so-so, are you worried? Are you concerned? Are you scared?
Yes, certainly worried and concerned. Scared might be a little strong, but no, I think it's a mistake to take the kind of sophisticated, knowing, this too will pass, and you do run into a lot of people in Washington who have this attitude that part of being an insider is knowing that this stuff isn't that serious. It is serious. January 6th was real. The 147 Republican members of Congress voting to overturn the electors of Arizona and Pennsylvania was real. The current state of the Republican Party is real. And those things should be of urgent concern to everyone, I think.
Tell me about the Bulwark.
Bulwark's a website we started 2 weeks after the Weekly Standard was closed down by
your baby.
Our owners. What's that?
Your baby.
Yeah, our baby. Yeah, we founded it in 1995, and good magazine, I think. But whatever, everything runs, I guess, has its course. We were anti-Trump. Our owner was pro-Trump, and I think we could have found other owners, but they didn't want us to. Anyway, we started the Bulwark. I think it's thebulwark.com. I think it's lively. It started off as kind of few of us who were never Trump Republicans. It's got a broader network of writers and readers now, honestly. And I think it's been a healthy voice because it's not dogmatically, it's certainly anti-Trump. It's anti-Trump Republican, but doesn't feel the need to defend everything the Biden administration is doing, doesn't feel the need we have diverse views on some practical policy issues. I think we've attracted a lot of people who don't want to just see party line sort of talking points. And we try to cover cultural stuff. And, I think we've found some good young, amusing writers too. So always good to have a little humor, even in somewhat trying times, right?
You're very experienced, personally, professionally. Tell me something about life. I should ask you that rather than you asking me. I would say this, that honestly, in the last several years, I'll put it this way. So I went to speak on a college campus, you do this all the time, about 10 years ago. And someone asked me, really out of the blue, I hadn't expected it. Sort of, Mr. Kristol, what have you changed your mind on, really? And, as an adult, or since you came to Washington, at that point, it would have been 25 years, about 25 years in Washington, or since starting the Weekly Standard 15 years before. And I, of course, had a few things I had changed my mind on, a few policies, but I've got to say, I said, and this was my true view, I haven't really changed my mind on that much. I kind of made up my mind about a lot of political things in the 70s and early 80s. And I think I was, I had pretty much stuck to it. I've got to say, I now still think that a lot of those things that I thought were correct, and I'm proud of some of the things I've been involved in, but I have rethought. Trump experiences made me rethink things. And in that, and I think that's true of a lot of people, and I think that's healthy. I guess I'm more convinced that as you get older, you should really try to challenge yourself, challenge your presuppositions, wonder. It's hard psychologically, right? I mean, it's hard to say, gee, I might have been kind of wrong for several, not wrong, fully wrong, or partly wrong. I underestimated this, I overestimated that side of things. Some of my allies whom I kind of was, rooting on turned out to be pretty bad.
It's a little hard to say that actually to yourself or publicly, but I think it's important I feel a sense of liberation now almost though in being able to think that. And I think to say it, you don't want to look like you're grandstanding and start attacking everyone you work with either. So it's a little delicate in terms of the public side of it, I'd say. But I feel personally a sort of a sense of liberation that I'm not part of some movement that I need to kind of, lock arms with everyone and defend all these other characters, that I kind of saying what I believe. And I have rethought things, I think, in the last few years.
Bill, terrific conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you. For information about This Is America in the World, visit our website, thisisamericatv.net, or our YouTube channel, This Is America TV, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Underwriting for This Is America in the World is made possible by the Japan-America Society of Washington, D.C., the Republic of Uzbekistan, the Sultanate of Oman, the Kingdom of Morocco, the National Association for Children of Addiction, Faces and Voices of Recovery, the Forerunner Foundation, the Rotendaro Family Trust, and the Embassy Series, Uniting People Through Musical Diplomacy.